A billionaire's fiancé shines like flawless perfection until the maid finds his baby girl dumped behind the house, soaked in tears and abandoned like garbage. How did she get there? Who left her to freeze in the darkness? And what horrifying secret was the socialite hiding behind her diamond smile? The truth will shatter everything you think you know about love, wealth, and motherhood. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The late afternoon sky hung heavy with gray clouds as Ashanti Jean, a housekeeper who had worked at the Oliver estate for 2 years, carried a black trash bag toward the service path behind the mansion. Her hands, calloused from years of scrubbing floors and folding linens in homes that would never be hers, moved with quiet efficiency. She knew every corner of the sprawling estate, the hidden garden gate, the loose marble tile near the kitchen, the way sunlight pooled in the nursery at dawn, better than she knew her own cramped studio apartment across town. Just one more trip, she murmured to herself, the same grounding phrase she'd whispered through countless shifts. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder and headed toward the row of green garbage bins lined against the back wall of the property. The mansion was unusually still that evening. No footsteps echoed from the upper floors. No hum of conversation drifted from David Oliver's office. No clatter of pots from Sandra, the estate cook. The only sound was the faint rustle of wind through the manicured hedges. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost dismissed it as her imagination. A soft, trembling whimper. Ashanti froze mid-step, her breath catching. She tilted her head, straining to listen. Silence. "You're hearing things, Ashanti," she whispered, shaking her head and resuming her walk. But she only made it 5 steps before the sound returned, this time unmistakable. A baby's cry, weak, desperate, broken. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the ground with a dull thud. She didn't even notice. The cry came again, sharper now, more frantic, coming from the outdoor trash area where the staff stored waste before weekly pickup. Ashanti ran, her shoes slapped against the stone path as she rushed past the service door and out into the open air. The wind bit at her skin. A line of trash bins stood in neat formation against the brick wall, waiting for morning collection. The cry came from there. Her stomach twisted into a knot of ice. "No, no, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible as she approached, hands trembling. She pulled aside one of the heavy trash bags, and her entire world stopped. Curled between 2 bags of garbage, shivering and soaked with tears, was Jenny Oliver. 6 months old, the baby girl David spoke of with such tenderness every morning. The child he had raised alone after losing his wife during childbirth. Her diaper was soaked through. Her tiny pink sleeper was stained with dirt. Her cheeks were raw and red from crying. Her lips looked dry, cracked from dehydration. "Oh my God," Ashanti gasped, dropping to her knees. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She scooped Jenny into her arms, pulling her close against her chest. The baby clung to her immediately, desperate little fingers clutching at Ashanti's uniform as if she had finally found safety after an eternity of terror. "Shh, sweetheart," Ashanti whispered, her voice breaking. "You're okay now. I'm here. I'm right here." Jenny's sobs softened into broken whimpers. Ashanti inspected her quickly, no visible injuries, but exhaustion and neglect radiated from her tiny, fragile body. "Who did this to you?" Ashanti whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Who left you out here?" Footsteps thundered from inside the house. "Ashanti, what's going on? Where's Jenny?" Ashanti looked up to see David Oliver bursting through the back door, his face pale with terror. His tie was loose, his hair disheveled, his eyes wide with panic. Genuine, raw panic. But behind him, moving with slower, more calculated steps, was Rose Gill, the elegant fiancée, the woman the tabloids called America's sweetheart. Perfect blonde waves, white silk blouse, designer heels clicking softly on the stone. Her expression was composed, too composed, her breathing steady, her makeup untouched, as if she hadn't spent the last hour searching for a missing baby. "She was in the trash," Ashanti said breathlessly, holding Jenny protectively. "Crying, abandoned. Whoever did this—" "Oh my God, Jenny!" David choked, rushing forward and taking his daughter into his arms. Jenny whimpered but didn't scream. Her wide, tear-filled eyes remained locked on Ashanti, as if she were the only person she trusted. "How long has she been missing?" Ashanti asked carefully, her gaze shifting to Rose. Rose stepped forward, placing a delicate hand on David's shoulder. I, I don't know. Maybe an hour? I was upstairs returning calls. When I checked the nursery, she was gone. I thought, her voice cracked perfectly, her eyes glistening. I thought I was losing my mind. Ashanti felt something cold crawl up her spine. Rose's words were flawless, her performance impeccable. But her eyes were flat, empty. "She's very dehydrated," Ashanti said quietly. "She needs water, a clean diaper, warmth." "Yes, yes, of course," Rose said, though her tone lacked urgency. David held Jenny tighter, his face stricken with guilt and confusion. "Ashanti, thank you. If you hadn't been here, I just did what anyone would do," Ashanti said softly. "No," David insisted, his voice trembling. "You saved her." Rose offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ashanti is wonderful with children," she said lightly. "Honestly, David, maybe she should care for Jenny full time. Just until things settle. You know how overwhelmed I've been planning the wedding." Ashanti's stomach dropped. Rose handed out compliments like poison candy, sweet on the surface, deadly underneath. But Ashanti nodded. "Of course, whatever Jenny needs." That night, David bought baby supplies, bottles, diapers, formula, clean clothes. Rose claimed exhaustion from the trauma and retreated to the master suite. Ashanti bathed Jenny in the staff bathroom sink, the warm water washing away the grime and fear. The baby relaxed for the first time, her tiny fingers gripping Ashanti's hand. "You're safe now," Ashanti whispered. "I promise." Jenny smiled, a small, exhausted smile, and Ashanti felt her heart crack open. She hadn't held a baby since losing her own daughter 7 years ago. The ache she had buried so deep resurfaced like a wound ripped open. When Ashanti turned off the bathroom light and stepped into the hallway, she saw Rose standing silently in the shadows near the staircase, watching her. Their eyes met. Rose smiled, but her eyes were cold, dead cold. "Good night, Ashanti," she said softly. Something in her tone told Ashanti this was only the beginning. 1 week had passed since the night Ashanti found baby Jenny abandoned between the garbage bins behind the Oliver estate. 7 days that permanently altered Ashanti's routine, and unknowingly, her entire future. Each morning she woke at 5 a.m., half an hour earlier than usual, to prepare Jenny's first bottle. The baby, who used to wake screaming and drenched in fear, now stirred quietly at the sound of Ashanti's steady footsteps. When Ashanti leaned over the small crib she had set up in her staff quarters, Jenny always greeted her the same way, arms lifted, eyes bright with recognition, as if the world only made sense when Ashanti was near. "Good morning, sweetheart," Ashanti whispered, lifting her gently. "Did you sleep well?" Jenny gurgled softly and nestled against her shoulder, the kind of affection that seeped beneath Ashanti's ribs, filling spaces she thought had gone numb forever. After feeding, Ashanti bathed Jenny in the sink, dressed her in the soft clothes David had bought, then tucked her into a stroller and carried on with her work. The child remained calm near Ashanti, quiet, curious, safe. The mansion, however, felt different, colder, tense. Rose moved in elegant, calculated steps around the house, her eyes always watchful. She hardly ever touched Jenny unless someone else was present, and when she did, Jenny cried. Ashanti noticed everything, and she knew something terrible was coming. The following Tuesday morning, Ashanti stood at the nursery sink, warm water running over her hands as she bathed Jenny with the same gentle precision she'd used every day that week. The baby splashed softly, her tiny fingers reaching for the bubbles, her giggles filling the quiet room like music Ashanti had forgotten existed. When she lifted Jenny from the water and wrapped her in a soft towel, the child immediately nestled into her shoulder. Still damp and warm, her breathing slowing to the rhythm of trust. "There we go, sweetheart," Ashanti whispered, carrying her toward the changing table. "All clean." From the corner of her eye, she caught movement in the doorway. Rose stood there perfectly still, watching. Her silk robe draped elegantly over her frame, her hair styled even at 6 o'clock a.m., her smile polished and unmoving, like a mask painted onto porcelain. She didn't step inside. She didn't offer to help. She simply watched, her eyes tracking every movement Ashanti made with Jenny. "Good morning, Rose," Ashanti said carefully, her voice neutral. "Good morning," Rose replied, her tone light, almost musical. "You're so wonderful with her, Ashanti, so natural." She paused, tilting her head. "It's almost like she's yours." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ashanti forced a small smile and turned back to Jenny, dressing her in a soft yellow onesie. "She's a sweet baby, easy to love." Rose's smile didn't falter. Indeed. Then she turned and disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps silent on the carpet. Ashanti exhaled slowly, her heart beating faster than it should. By mid-morning, Ashanti had finished her rounds, dusting the living room, polishing the kitchen counters, folding laundry in the staff quarters. Jenny napped peacefully in her stroller nearby, her tiny fist curled beneath her chin. Everything felt routine, ordinary, until Ashanti returned to the kitchen to prepare Jenny's next bottle. She opened the cabinet where she'd stored the freshly sterilized bottles the night before. 4 glass bottles, cleaned, dried, and lined up neatly on the shelf. They were gone. In their place sat 3 bottles, their nipples still wet, formula residue crusted around the rims. Dirty, clearly used. Ashanti's stomach dropped. She stared at them, confusion twisting into unease. She had cleaned those bottles herself. She had watched them dry. She had put them away. "Looking for something?" Ashanti spun around. Rose stood in the kitchen doorway, a coffee mug in her hand, her expression serene. "I," Ashanti hesitated. "I cleaned these bottles last night, but they're dirty again." Rose stepped closer, glancing at the cabinet with mild curiosity. "Are you sure? Maybe you forgot." She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze steady. "You've been working so hard lately, Ashanti. It's understandable if things slip through the cracks." Ashanti felt heat rise to her face. "I didn't forget." "Of course not," Rose said smoothly, setting her mug on the counter. "I'm just saying, sleep deprivation can do strange things. I would know." She offered a sympathetic smile. "I'll ask Sandra to help you keep track of things. We wouldn't want David to worry." Before Ashanti could respond, Rose left the kitchen, her heels clicking softly down the hall. Ashanti stood frozen, staring at the dirty bottles. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for one, inspecting it. It had definitely been used, recently, but she hadn't used it. That afternoon, David returned from a business meeting and found Ashanti rocking Jenny in the living room. The baby had been fussy all day, refusing to settle, and Ashanti had spent the last hour humming softly until Jenny finally dozed off in her arms. "She looks peaceful," David said quietly, stepping into the room with a tired smile. Ashanti looked up. "She's had a rough day. I think she might be teething." David nodded, his expression softening as he watched his daughter sleep. "Ashanti, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. Rose and I both—" He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Ashanti hesitated, then decided to speak. "David, I need to mention something. I've noticed a few inconsistencies. Bottles I cleaned appearing dirty again. Small things going missing." David frowned, but his tone remained gentle. "Missing? Like what?" "Just items out of place. Things I know I put away." She kept her voice measured, careful not to sound paranoid. David sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Ashanti, you've been under a lot of stress. We all have. Rose mentioned you might be feeling overwhelmed." He gave her a reassuring smile. "If you need a break, just say the word. We can hire additional help." Ashanti's chest tightened. "I'm not overwhelmed. I just thought you should know." "I appreciate you telling me," David interrupted gently. "But let's not create problems where there aren't any, okay? Rose has been amazing through all of this. She's been so supportive." He reached out and squeezed Ashanti's shoulder. "Just focus on Jenny. That's all I need from you." He left the room before Ashanti could say another word. She sat there, holding the sleeping baby, feeling the walls of the mansion close in around her. That evening, after putting Jenny down for the night, Ashanti returned to her quarters to finish folding laundry. She pulled a clean uniform from the basket and shook it out, and something heavy tumbled onto the floor with a dull clink. A baby bottle. Dirty. Formula dried inside the glass. Ashanti's breath caught. She stared at it, her pulse pounding in her ears. She hadn't put that there. She would never put a dirty bottle in her laundry. But someone had. She looked toward the door, half expecting to see Rose standing there in the shadows again, watching, waiting. The hallway was empty, but Ashanti knew this wasn't an accident. This was a message, and the war had only just begun. It started with small things, the kind of things that made Ashanti question herself before she questioned anyone else. On Thursday morning, she poured Jenny's formula into a clean bottle, measured precisely as always, then set it aside while she warmed water in the kettle. She turned away for less than 30 seconds to retrieve a burp cloth from the drawer. When she turned back, the bottle had tipped over, milk pooling across the marble counter and dripping onto the freshly mopped floor. Ashanti stared at it, her pulse quickening. She had placed that bottle in the center of the counter, nowhere near the edge. She knew she had. "Oh, Ashanti." Rose's voice drifted in from the hallway before she appeared in the kitchen doorway, perfectly dressed in a cream cashmere sweater, her expression a mixture of concern and pity. "What happened here?" "I don't know," Ashanti said quietly, grabbing a towel. "I set the bottle down and—" "You must have been distracted," Rose said softly, stepping closer. "It happens. You've been doing so much." She glanced toward the nursery where Jenny had started fussing. "Let me help you clean this up." "I've got it," Ashanti said, her voice firmer than she intended. Rose's smile tightened. "Of course." She turned gracefully and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Ashanti alone with the mess and the growing knot in her stomach. 2 days later, Ashanti opened the diaper bag she'd packed that morning, the same bag she used every day when taking Jenny for afternoon strolls around the estate. Inside, 3 diapers had been slashed open, the absorbent filling spilling out like snow across the contents. Her hands trembled as she stared at the damage. She had packed this bag herself. She had checked it twice. These diapers had been whole. "Everything all right?" David stood at the entrance to the foyer, briefcase in hand, his expression distracted but polite. Ashanti hesitated, then showed him the bag. "Someone damaged these." David frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean, damaged?" "They've been cut," Ashanti said carefully. "I packed this bag this morning." "They were fine." David glanced at the diapers, then back at her, his expression softening into something that made Ashanti's chest tighten, sympathy mixed with doubt. "Ashanti," he said gently, "you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe they tore accidentally when you were packing. It happens." "I didn't—" "Rose mentioned you seemed overwhelmed," David continued, his tone still kind but dismissive. "Maybe it's time to consider additional help. I don't want you burning out." Ashanti felt the words like a punch. "I'm not overwhelmed, David. I'm telling you, I appreciate everything you do," he said, cutting her off gently. "But let's not create problems where there aren't any, okay?" He squeezed her shoulder, the same reassuring gesture he'd given her before, and left through the front door. Ashanti stood frozen, the ruined diapers still in her hands. That afternoon, Jenny started crying in the nursery. The high-pitched wail echoed through the mansion, frantic and desperate. Ashanti was in the laundry room folding towels when she heard it. She dropped what she was doing and hurried toward the sound. As she passed the main hallway, she saw Rose standing just outside the nursery door, perfectly still, her arms crossed, her expression blank. Jenny's cries grew louder, more distressed. Rose didn't move. "Rose," Ashanti said, breathless as she reached the doorway. "Didn't you hear her?" Rose turned slowly, her smile polite. "Of course I did. I was just about to check on her." "But you're so much better with her than I am." She stepped aside, gesturing toward the nursery. "She always calms down faster for you." Ashanti pushed past her and scooped Jenny into her arms. The baby clung to her immediately, her sobs quieting to broken hiccups. Ashanti rocked her gently, whispering soft reassurances. When she turned around, Rose was still standing in the doorway, watching. "See," Rose said softly, "she loves you." The words should have sounded kind. Instead, they felt like a warning. That evening, Ashanti sat in the kitchen with Sandra, the estate cook, who had worked for the Oliver family for nearly a decade. Sandra was a sturdy woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a warm, no-nonsense demeanor. She poured Ashanti a cup of tea and sat down across from her expression serious. "How are you holding up?" Sandra asked quietly. Ashanti wrapped her hands around the mug. "I'm fine." Sandra studied her for a long moment, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Ashanti, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen." Ashanti looked up. "Be careful," Sandra said, her tone urgent. "Something's not right with that woman." Ashanti's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Sandra glanced toward the hallway, making sure they were alone. "I've seen her watching you. I've seen the way she looks at Jenny, like the child is a problem to be solved, not a person to be loved." She paused. "And I've noticed things going missing, things being moved, small things that make people look careless." "You've noticed it too?" Ashanti whispered. Sandra nodded. "I know what gaslighting looks like, honey. I've lived it before." Her eyes softened. "Whatever she's doing, she's setting you up for something. And Mr. Oliver, he doesn't see it. He's too blinded by grief and gratitude to see what's right in front of him." Ashanti felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "What do I do?" Sandra reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Document everything. Keep your head down, and don't let her isolate you." She held Ashanti's gaze. "And whatever you do, don't let her come between you and that baby. Jenny needs you." Ashanti nodded, but fear coiled tighter around her chest, because she knew Sandra was right, and she knew deep in her bones that this was only going to get worse. The Oliver estate glittered with wealth and elegance that Saturday evening. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the grand hall, where over 100 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled beneath arrangements of white orchids and roses. The engagement party had been planned for months, a lavish celebration of David Oliver and Rose Gill's upcoming wedding, the kind of event that made headlines in society columns. Ashanti moved quietly through the crowd in her staff uniform, carrying trays of champagne and clearing empty glasses. She had volunteered to help serve, knowing Jenny would be on display tonight and wanting to stay close. Near the grand fireplace, Rose held court among a cluster of elite guests, her emerald gown shimmering as she laughed at something a councilman's wife had said. Jenny sat perched in Rose's arms, dressed in a white lace dress, her tiny fists clutching at the fabric of Rose's gown. "She's absolutely precious," cooed an older woman with pearls draped around her neck. "You're going to be such a wonderful stepmother." "Rose, David is so lucky," another guest chimed in. "After everything he's been through, to find someone who loves his daughter as her own, it's truly remarkable." Rose smiled graciously, her posture perfect, her voice honey-sweet. "Jenny is my world. I can't imagine life without her." The words were flawless, but Ashanti, watching from across the room, saw the way Rose's arms remained stiff, the way she held Jenny at a distance, like a prop rather than a child. Then Jenny started to fuss. It began as a small whimper, barely audible over the string quartet playing in the corner. But within seconds, the whimper escalated into a full-bodied cry, loud, desperate, the kind of wail that made heads turn. Rose's smile faltered. She bounced Jenny awkwardly, but the baby only cried harder, her face turning red, her tiny body arching away from Rose's chest. "Oh dear," the councilman's wife said with a sympathetic laugh. "Someone's not happy." "She's probably just tired," Rose said, her voice tight as she continued bouncing. But Jenny screamed louder, tears streaming down her face. "Maybe she needs her nanny," someone suggested gently. Rose's jaw tightened. "I'm perfectly capable of handling my own daughter." But Jenny was inconsolable now, her cries echoing through the grand hall, drawing more attention. David appeared at Rose's side, concern etched into his features. "Should I take her?" he asked. "No, I've got her," Rose insisted, though her composure was cracking. Across the room, Ashanti felt her chest tighten. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to intervene. But she remained frozen, knowing her place. Then Jenny did something that changed everything. Through her sobs, the baby stretched out her tiny arms, not toward David, not toward Rose, but toward Ashanti, standing 20 feet away near the entrance to the kitchen. "Mama!" Jenny cried, her voice cutting through the music and conversation like a blade. "Mama!" The room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned, eyes widened. Rose's face went pale. "Mama!" Jenny screamed again, reaching desperately toward Ashanti, her little fingers grasping at air. One of the guests, a kind-faced woman in a silver dress, touched Rose's arm gently. "Perhaps you should let the maid help. The poor thing clearly wants her." Rose's eyes flashed with something dark and dangerous, but she forced a smile. "Of course, Ashanti, would you—" But before Ashanti could move, Rose shifted Jenny in her arms, and Ashanti saw it, the subtle movement of Rose's fingers pinching the soft flesh of Jenny's upper arm. Hard, Jenny's scream pierced the air louder than before, filled with pain rather than distress. The room recoiled. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ashanti rushed forward, her training forgotten, and reached for Jenny. The baby practically threw herself into Ashanti's arms, clinging to her desperately, her sobs muffled against Ashanti's shoulder. "Shh, sweetheart, I've got you," Ashanti whispered, rocking her gently. Within seconds, Jenny's cries began to quiet. The silence that followed was suffocating. David stood frozen, his face a mask of confusion and humiliation. Rose stood beside him, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her perfectly manicured hands trembling. Then Rose spoke, her voice shaking with what sounded like tears. "I don't understand. She's never done that before." She turned to David, her eyes wide. "David, I think Ashanti did something to her earlier. She must have hurt her somehow. That's why she's so upset with me." Ashanti's blood ran cold. "What? No, I would never. She's been acting strange all week," Rose continued, her voice gaining strength as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Forgetting things, making mistakes. I didn't want to say anything, but David, I'm worried about her stability around Jenny." Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. Eyes that had been sympathetic moments ago now turned suspicious, judgmental. David looked between Rose and Ashanti, his expression torn, devastated. "Ashanti, is that true? Have you been—" "No," Ashanti said firmly, her voice shaking as she held Jenny protectively. "I would never hurt her. Never." But she could see it in his eyes, the doubt creeping in, the confusion, the embarrassment of this scene unfolding in front of his peers. Rose stepped closer to David, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry. I didn't want to make a scene. I love Jenny so much. I can't bear the thought of anything happening to her." David wrapped his arm around Rose, pulling her close while she sobbed into his shoulder. And in that moment, Ashanti felt the room turn against her. The warmth drained from every gaze. She was no longer the hero who had saved Jenny. She was the suspicious outsider, the unstable employee, the threat. Jenny clung tighter to her neck, still whimpering softly. And Ashanti realized with crushing clarity, this was exactly what Rose had wanted. The days following the engagement party felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. Every task Ashanti performed was scrutinized. Every interaction with Jenny was observed. Rose's sabotage had escalated from subtle manipulation to blatant psychological warfare. On Tuesday morning, Ashanti found Jenny's favorite stuffed elephant torn apart, its stuffing scattered across the nursery floor. On Wednesday, formula powder was dumped into the clean laundry she'd folded the night before. On Thursday, she discovered scratches on the nursery door, deep gouges that looked like someone had dragged keys across the wood. Rose was tightening the noose, and Ashanti could feel it. Friday afternoon brought the breaking point. Ashanti was carrying a basket of clean towels down the upstairs hallway when Rose appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression cold and calculating. They were alone. No David, no Sandra, no witnesses. "Excuse me," Ashanti said quietly, trying to step around her. Rose moved deliberately into her path. "You should leave," Rose said, her voice low and venomous, "before things get worse." Ashanti's pulse quickened. "I'm not going anywhere. Jenny needs me." "Jenny," Rose hissed, "is not your child, and David is not your concern." "Then why are you so threatened by me?" Ashanti asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Rose's eyes flashed. Then, in one swift motion, She grabbed her own arm and twisted her body backward, stumbling against the wall. "Don't touch me!" Rose screamed at the top of her lungs. Ashanti froze, her basket of towels tumbling to the floor. "What are you—" "David!" Rose cried out, her voice breaking with fake tears. "David, help!" Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. David appeared seconds later, his face panicked. "What happened?" he demanded. Rose clutched her arm dramatically, tears streaming down her face. She she pushed me. I was just walking past, and she grabbed my arm and shoved me against the wall." "That's not true," Ashanti said desperately. "I didn't touch her. She grabbed herself." "Are you calling her a liar?" David snapped, his voice harder than Ashanti had ever heard it. "I'm telling you the truth. She's setting me up." "Enough," David said, his jaw tight. He turned to Rose, his expression softening. "Are you hurt?" Rose nodded, still crying. "I'm fine. I don't understand why she hates me so much." David guided Rose down the hallway toward their bedroom, leaving Ashanti standing alone in the corridor, her hands trembling. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in the air, like the charge before a storm. That evening, David's parents arrived unexpectedly. His father, Gerald Oliver, a stern man with silver hair, and his mother, Eleanor, a graceful woman with sharp, observant eyes. They had driven up from their estate in the countryside for an impromptu visit. Ashanti served dinner in the formal dining room, her movements mechanical, her mind racing. Rose sat beside David, her arm wrapped in a theatrical bandage, playing the wounded victim perfectly. After dinner, Eleanor asked to see Jenny. David led his parents upstairs to the nursery while Rose excused herself to take a phone call. Ashanti followed quietly, staying in the background as she always did. But when they reached the nursery, the crib was empty. David's face went white. "Where's Jenny?" "She was sleeping," Rose called from down the hallway, rushing toward them. "I put her down an hour ago." "Well, she's not here now," Gerald said sharply. Panic erupted. David ran from room to room, calling Jenny's name. Rose searched the master suite, her movements frantic but calculated. Eleanor checked the guest rooms. Ashanti stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. Then she heard it, so faint she almost missed it beneath the chaos. A baby's cry, muffled, distant, coming from below. "The basement," Ashanti whispered. She ran toward the service stairs, taking them two at a time, her shoes slapping against the stone steps. The basement level was cold and dimly lit, lined with storage rooms in the estate's wine cellar. A large, climate-controlled room with brick archways and floor-to-ceiling wine racks. The cry grew louder as she approached the cellar door. Ashanti grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't budge, locked from the outside. "Jenny," she called, pressing her ear to the door. The crying intensified, desperate, terrified. "She's in here," Ashanti screamed up the stairs. "Someone locked her in the wine cellar." Footsteps thundered down the stairs. David reached her first, his face stricken. He fumbled with the lock, an old-fashioned bolt that had clearly been slid into place deliberately. The door swung open and cold air rushed out. Jenny sat in the middle of the stone floor, shivering, her face red and soaked with tears. The temperature in the cellar was kept at 55 degrees, far too cold for a baby. David rushed in and scooped her into his arms. Jenny's cries were hoarse, exhausted, as if she'd been screaming for a long time. Gerald and Eleanor appeared in the doorway, their expressions horrified. Rose arrived last, her hand covering her mouth in shock, but Ashanti noticed her eyes. They were cold, calculating. "How did she get in there?" Eleanor demanded. David looked at Ashanti, his eyes filled with confusion and growing suspicion. "Ashanti, you were the last one with her this afternoon." "I put her down for her nap at 2 o'clock, Ashanti said desperately. "In her crib. I checked on her at 3 and she was sleeping." "Then how did she end up locked in the wine cellar?" Gerald asked, his voice stern. Rose stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Ashanti has the only key to the basement. She's the only one who comes down here for storage." "That's not true," Ashanti protested. "Anyone can access the basement." "She's been acting strange for weeks," Rose interrupted, tears filling her eyes. "David, I didn't want to say this in front of your parents, but I think she's unstable. First the engagement party, then pushing me this afternoon, and now—" Her voice broke. Now this. David stood there holding his shivering daughter, looking between Rose and Ashanti. His father's expression was hard. His mother's eyes were unreadable. Then David spoke, his voice quiet but devastated. Ashanti, you have 24 hours to prove you didn't do this. The words hit like a physical blow. Ashanti felt her knees weaken, her vision blur. David, please. 24 hours, he repeated, his voice breaking. Or you're gone. He turned and carried Jenny upstairs, his parents following. Rose lingered for just a moment, her eyes meeting Ashanti's in the dim light of the basement. She smiled. Then she turned and disappeared up the stairs, leaving Ashanti alone in the cold darkness, with the weight of an impossible deadline crushing down on her shoulders. Ashanti didn't sleep that night. She sat in her small staff quarters, a notebook open on her lap, her hands shaking as she tried to piece together evidence that might save her. At 2 a.m., a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Sandra standing in the hallway, wrapped in a bathrobe, her expression urgent. I need to tell you something, Sandra whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Can I come in? Ashanti stepped aside, and Sandra closed the door quietly behind her. I saw her, Sandra said, her voice low but firm. At the engagement party, I saw Rose pinch Jenny hard, right before she started screaming. Ashanti's breath caught. You saw it? Sandra nodded. I was clearing glasses near the fireplace. I had a clear view. Rose knew exactly what she was doing. She hurt that baby on purpose to make you look bad. Will you tell David? Ashanti asked desperately. Sandra's face fell. I tried. He wouldn't listen. He said I was being influenced by you, that Rose has been under so much stress. She reached out and squeezed Ashanti's hand. But I know what I saw, and I'll testify to it if it comes to that. The word testify hung in the air like a death sentence. After Sandra left, Ashanti pulled out her phone and began documenting everything she could remember. Times, dates, incidents, the dirty bottles, the slashed diapers, the milk spill, the wine cellar door that could only be locked from the outside. She photographed the bruises on her own arms where she'd bumped into furniture in her panic. She wrote down every conversation, every accusation, every moment Rose had twisted reality. But as dawn broke through her window, Ashanti realized the horrible truth. None of this would be enough. It was her word against Rose's, and David had already made his choice. At 7 a.m., Ashanti went to the nursery to check on Jenny. The baby was awake, sitting up in her crib, her eyes lighting up the moment she saw Ashanti. Mama, Jenny said clearly, reaching out her arms. Ashanti's heart shattered. She lifted Jenny gently, holding her close, breathing in the sweet scent of baby shampoo and innocence. I'm here, sweetheart, Ashanti whispered. I'm right here. Jenny buried her face in Ashanti's neck, her tiny hands clutching at her shirt with desperate trust. Footsteps approached from the hallway. Ashanti turned to see David standing in the doorway, his face exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. David, Ashanti said softly, please listen to me. I would never hurt Jenny. You know that. You've seen how much I love her. David's jaw tightened. I thought I knew that, but Rose showed me something last night. What? Ashanti asked, her stomach dropping. Security footage, David said quietly. From the basement hallway. It shows you going down to the wine cellar at 4 p.m. yesterday, right around the time Jenny went missing. Ashanti's mind raced. I was doing laundry. I went to the storage room to get detergent. I never went near the wine cellar. The footage shows otherwise, David said, his voice hollow. Then it's been edited, Ashanti said desperately. David, Rose is manipulating you. She's been setting me up for weeks. Stop, David said, his voice breaking. Just stop. I can't do this right now. My daughter was locked in a freezing room for God knows how long. My parents think I'm an unfit father, and the woman I'm supposed to marry is barely holding herself together because she's terrified of the person I hired to care for my child. I'm not that person, Ashanti pleaded. You know me. I thought I did, David said, turning away. 24 hours, Ashanti. That's all you have. He left the nursery, leaving Ashanti standing there with Jenny in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Later that afternoon, while Ashanti was changing Jenny's diaper in the nursery, Rose appeared in the doorway. She waited until she was certain they were alone, then stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Her expression was no longer the polished mask she wore for David. It was cold, venomous, triumphant. "You should have left when I told you to," Rose said quietly. Ashanti kept her focus on Jenny, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "What do you want?" Rose stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "David deserves a life free from his past. That means free from reminders of his dead wife. Free from the guilt that haunts him every time he looks at that child." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "And free from meddling housekeepers who think they can replace what he's lost." "You're sick," Ashanti said, her voice shaking. Rose smiled. "I'm practical. Jenny is a complication. You are a complication, and by tomorrow morning, you'll both be gone, one way or another." "You can't touch her," Ashanti said fiercely. "David loves her." "David loves the idea of her," Rose corrected. "But guilt and love are easily confused. Once you're gone, I'll convince him that boarding school is best. That distance will help him heal. That a fresh start is what this family needs." Ashanti felt ice spread through her chest. "You're a monster," and Rose leaned in close, her breath cold against Ashanti's ear. "I'm a survivor, and survivors do whatever it takes to win." She straightened, smoothed her dress, and walked out of the nursery, leaving Ashanti trembling. That night, after putting Jenny to bed, Ashanti knelt beside her own bed in her small quarters. She hadn't prayed in years, not since the night she lost her daughter. But tonight, with nowhere else to turn, she closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. "Please," she breathed, "if there's any justice left in this world, please let the truth come out. Don't let that woman win. Don't let Jenny suffer for Rose's cruelty." Her voice broke, tears spilling onto her clasped hands. "I can't lose another child, please. Not again." The room remained silent, but in the nursery down the hall, Jenny stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand clutching the stuffed elephant Ashanti had stitched back together that afternoon. And somewhere in the mansion, the clock continued ticking down her final hours. David Oliver sat in the living room at 9:00 a.m., his hands clasped between his knees, watching the driveway through the window. His mother had insisted on calling Dr. Patricia Harris, their family pediatrician for over a decade, to conduct a wellness check on Jenny. "It's standard procedure after a traumatic incident," Eleanor had said firmly that morning. "We need to make sure she's physically unharmed." David had agreed, though his mind felt fractured, split between his love for his daughter, his trust in Rose, and the growing unease he couldn't quite silence. When Dr. Harris's car pulled up, David met her at the door. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and the steady demeanor of someone who had seen too much suffering to be easily fooled. "David," she said, shaking his hand, "your mother filled me in. I'm so sorry you're going through this." "Thank you for coming," David said quietly, leading her inside. Rose appeared at the top of the stairs, descending gracefully, her expression perfectly composed, concerned but controlled. "Dr. Harris," Rose said warmly, extending her hand, "I'm so glad you're here. We've all been so worried about Jenny." "Of course," Dr. Harris said politely. "Where is she now?" "In the nursery," David said. "Ashanti is with her." Rose's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes, Jenny has become extremely attached to Ashanti, almost unnaturally so. It's been concerning. Dr. Harris glanced at Rose, her expression neutral. "Attachment is normal for infants, especially to primary caregivers." "But Ashanti isn't her mother," Rose said quickly. "I am, or I will be. And yet Jenny seems resistant to bonding with me. Dr. Harris, I have to be honest. I'm worried that Ashanti may be fostering an unhealthy dependency." David shifted uncomfortably. His mother, sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, remained silent but watchful. "Let's examine Jenny first," Dr. Harris said calmly. "Then we can discuss any concerns." They moved to the examination room, a guest bedroom that had been converted for the visit. Ashanti brought Jenny in, the baby calm in her arms but immediately alert when she saw the unfamiliar setup. "Good morning, Jenny," Dr. Harris said gently, approaching slowly. "I'm just going to take a look at you, okay? Make sure you're feeling healthy." Jenny whimpered, clinging to Ashanti's neck. It's okay, sweetheart, Ashanti whispered. This nice doctor just wants to help you. Rose stepped forward. I should hold her during the examination. I am her future mother, after all. Jenny immediately burst into tears, reaching desperately for Ashanti. Dr. Harris held up a hand. Let's keep her comfortable for now. Ashanti can stay. Rose's jaw tightened, but she stepped back, her eyes cold. Dr. Harris began the examination methodically, checking Jenny's temperature, listening to her heart and lungs, examining her reflexes. She measured Jenny's weight and height, noting the numbers carefully. She's slightly underweight for her age, Dr. Harris said quietly. Not drastically, but noticeable. Has she been eating normally? She's been fussy this past week, David said. We thought it was teething. Dr. Harris nodded, continuing her examination. When she began inspecting Jenny's arms and legs, her expression changed subtly, a professional mask slipping into place that David had seen before when something was wrong. David, could you come here for a moment, Dr. Harris said, her tone carefully neutral. David approached, his heart beginning to race. Dr. Harris gently turned Jenny's left arm, revealing small bruises on the soft inner flesh. Dark purple marks, shaped distinctly like adult fingertips. These are finger-shaped bruises, Dr. Harris said quietly. Multiple in various stages of healing, some new, some several days old. David felt the air leave his lungs. What? Dr. Harris continued examining, finding similar marks on Jenny's upper right arm and one on her thigh. She also shows signs of mild dehydration, though not severe. And look here. She gently turned Jenny's shoulder, revealing a faint bruise along her collarbone. This pattern is consistent with being grabbed or restrained. That's impossible, Rose said from across the room, her voice rising. She must have gotten those from playing. Babies bruise easily. Not in these locations, Dr. Harris said firmly, and not in this pattern. These are inflicted injuries. The room went silent. David felt his world tilting, his vision blurring at the edges. His mother stood, her face pale but her voice steady. Are you saying someone hurt her deliberately? Dr. Harris looked at David with sad professional compassion. Yes. These injuries are consistent with physical abuse. David's legs gave out. He sank into the chair beside the examination table, his hands covering his face. David, Rose said urgently, moving toward him, this is clearly Ashanti's doing. She's the one who's been alone with Jenny. Actually, Dr. Harris interrupted, some of these bruises are quite recent, within the last 24 to 48 hours. David, when was Jenny locked in the wine cellar? Yesterday evening, David whispered. And before that, who was caring for her? David's mind raced back through the timeline. Rose had insisted on watching Jenny that afternoon. Rose had been the last one to see her before she went missing. Dr. Harris turned to Jenny, who was still nestled against Ashanti's shoulder. Calmer now, but watchful. The doctor knelt down to the baby's eye level, her voice gentle. Jenny, sweetheart, can you show me who gave you these ouchies? The room held its breath. Jenny looked at Dr. Harris, then at her own arm, where the bruises darkened her skin. She touched one of the marks gently, her tiny fingers tracing the purple shape. Then slowly she turned her head and pointed. Her small finger extended across the room directly at Rose. Time stopped. David's head snapped up. Eleanor gasped. Ashanti's eyes filled with tears. Rose's face went sheet white, her carefully maintained composure cracking like shattered glass. That's ridiculous. She's a baby. She doesn't understand what she's doing. Jenny, David whispered, his voice breaking as he stood and crossed the room. He knelt before his daughter, tears streaming down his face. Jenny, sweetheart. Who hurt you? Jenny looked at her father with whitish, solemn eyes. She touched her arm again, then pointed once more at Rose. No, David breathed, the word barely audible. Rose backed toward the door, her hands trembling, her perfect facade disintegrating. You don't understand. She's lying. Babies lie. Ashanti taught her to do this. Babies don't lie, Dr. Harris said coldly, and they don't fabricate injuries. These bruises are real, Miss Gill, and they match exactly the position fingers would be in if someone grabbed her forcefully and repeatedly. Rose's breathing became rapid, panicked. David, you have to believe me. I love Jenny. I would never. You locked her in the wine cellar, Eleanor said, her voice like ice. You've been hurting her all this time. You don't know what it's like, Rose suddenly screamed, her composure shattering completely. Having to pretend to love a child that isn't yours, having to smile while everyone praises you for raising another woman's baby. Her voice cracked. I did what I had to do. David needed to move on. And that child, she pointed at Jenny with trembling fingers, that child was holding him back. The confession hung in the air like poison. David stood slowly, his face ashen, his entire body shaking with fury and devastation. Get out, he whispered. David, get out of my house, he roared. Gerald Oliver, who had been standing silently in the doorway, pulled out his phone. I'm calling the police. And as Rose began to unravel completely, crying and screaming denials, David collapsed to his knees, reaching for his daughter, his precious, hurt, beautiful daughter, and wept. David's hands were still shaking as he led Rose into the mansion's grand foyer, away from the examination room where Jenny remained with Dr. Harris and his mother. His father followed at a distance, phone already in hand, having stepped into the hallway to make the call he'd promised. Ashanti stood frozen in the doorway between the foyer and the living room. Jenny clutched protectively against her chest. She knew she should leave, give them privacy, but her feet wouldn't move. Jenny needed her, and something told her she needed to witness this. Rose, David said, his voice hollow, barely recognizable. Tell me the truth. Did you hurt my daughter? Rose's face was pale, her carefully constructed mask cracking at the edges. David, you have to understand. Did you hurt her? David's voice rose, raw with anguish. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Rose cried, her composure fracturing. I did everything right. I was perfect for you. Everyone said so. Answer the question, David demanded, stepping closer. Rose backed away, her breathing ragged, tears streaming down her face. But Ashanti saw the rage burning beneath them, not remorse. She was in the well, Rose screamed suddenly, the words exploding from her like a confession she could no longer contain. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was your dead wife. That child is a ghost haunting this house. Haunting you. David doesn't need that child reminding him of what he lost. The words echoed through the marble foyer like gunshots. David staggered backward as if he'd been physically struck. My God, he whispered. I did what I had to do, Rose continued, her voice rising to a shriek, all pretense of elegance stripped away. She had to go. You deserved a fresh start. With me. Not with some crying reminder of the woman you couldn't save. Footsteps rushed into the foyer. Eleanor Oliver appeared from the examination room, her face ashen. Sandra emerged from the kitchen, her hand over her mouth in horror. Dor Harris stood in the hallway, her expression professionally composed but her eyes filled with disgust. They had all heard everything. You tried to kill my daughter, David said, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. You hurt her. You locked her into the wine cellar to freeze. You were going to... He couldn't finish the sentence, his entire body shaking with rage and grief. I was trying to help you, Rose shrieked, her voice cracking with desperation and fury. You're too weak to see what needs to be done. That child was holding you back from happiness. From us. There is no us, David said, his voice cold and final. There never was. Rose's face contorted with rage. This is her fault. She spun around, pointing a trembling finger at Ashanti. She poisoned you against me. She turned Jenny against me. That manipulative maid destroyed everything. Ashanti held Jenny tighter, the baby whimpering softly against her shoulder. I loved you, Rose screamed at David, hysteria taking over completely. I would have given you everything. A new life, a new family. But you couldn't let go of the past, could you? You couldn't let go of her. The front door opened. Two police officers entered, summoned by Gerald Oliver's call, their expressions grave and alert. Rose saw them and her face went white. No, this is a mistake. Rose Gill, one of the officers said calmly, we need you to come with us. I didn't do anything wrong, Rose shrieked, backing away. David, tell them I was trying to help. "You abused my daughter," David said, his voice thick with tears. "You confessed in front of witnesses." The officer stepped forward. "Miss Gill, you have the right to remain silent." "No!" Rose lunged toward David, her composure completely shattered. "You're making a mistake. She's the one who should be arrested. Ashanti is the criminal. She stole Jenny from me. She stole you from me." The second officer gently but firmly took Rose's arm. She fought, screaming, her perfect facade disintegrating into raw, ugly fury. "You ruined everything," she screamed at Ashanti as the officers guided her toward the door. "I had the perfect life, the perfect future, and you destroyed it." Ashanti stood silent, holding Jenny protectively, tears streaming down her own face, not from Rose's accusations, but from the weight of finally being vindicated, finally being believed. As the officers led Rose out of the mansion, her screams echoing through the estate until the police car doors shut and muffled them, the foyer fell into stunned silence. David collapsed onto the marble floor, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders heaving with sobs. Eleanor moved to her son, kneeling beside him, wrapping her arms around him as he wept. Sandra approached Ashanti quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved that baby." Ashanti looked down at Jenny, who had finally stopped crying, her tiny hand resting against Ashanti's collarbone, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but safe. Finally, truly safe. "Mama," Jenny whispered softly, the word barely audible. And Ashanti, holding the child who had brought her back from the darkness of her own grief, finally allowed herself to believe it. The nightmare was over. 3 weeks had passed since Rose's arrest, and the Oliver estate felt different, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. The marble hallways that once echoed with tension now hummed with quiet peace. Jenny's laughter, once so rare and fragile, rang out freely through the nursery windows. Ashanti stood in the garden behind the estate, watching Jenny toddle through the grass in her pink dress, chasing butterflies with unsteady but determined steps. The same space where Ashanti had found her, crying in the darkness weeks ago, now glowed with afternoon sunlight, transformed from a place of trauma into one of healing. Ashanti. She turned to find David approaching from the house, his hands in his pockets, his expression humble and heavy with emotion. He looked older somehow, the weight of everything that had happened etched into the lines around his eyes. "David," she said softly. He stood beside her, watching Jenny play, silence stretching between them for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice thick with regret. "I owe you an apology that words can't possibly convey." He turned to face her fully. "I should have listened to you. I should have trusted you. I let my grief and guilt blind me to what was right in front of me." His voice cracked. "I let Rose manipulate me into doubting the person who loved my daughter more than anyone." Ashanti felt tear prick at her eyes. "You were hurting. You wanted to believe." "That's no excuse," David interrupted gently. "You saved Jenny's life, multiple times, and I almost fired you for it." He paused, swallowing hard. "I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you, to both of you." Jenny noticed them talking and came running, arms outstretched, her face bright with joy. "Mama," she called, stumbling toward Ashanti. The word still made Ashanti's heart clench, with pain, with love, with the memory of the daughter she'd lost 7 years ago. David watched his daughter climb into Ashanti's arms, then spoke carefully. "I have something to ask you, and I want you to know there's no pressure. You can say no." Ashanti looked at him, confused. "I don't want you to be Jenny's maid," David said firmly. "I want you to be her full-time caregiver, with complete authority over her care, her schedule, her well-being, a salary that reflects that responsibility, your own suite in the house if you want it, legal guardianship rights if anything ever happens to me." His eyes were earnest, desperate. "Jenny needs you, not as staff, as family." Ashanti felt her breath catch. The offer was everything she'd never dared to dream of, and everything that terrified her most. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I lost my daughter 7 years ago. I've spent every day since then trying not to feel that pain again. And Jenny, she looked down at the baby in her arm, who was playing with the collar of her shirt, oblivious to the conversation. But if I let myself love her completely, if I let her become mine, and then something happens. Nothing's going to happen, David said softly. Not anymore, not while I'm breathing. Ashanti closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then she felt Jenny's small hand on her face, patting her cheek gently. She opened her eyes to find the baby looking at her with solemn, knowing eyes. Mama, Jenny said again, this time softer, more certain. Mama. And something inside Ashanti, something that had been locked away and frozen for 7 years, finally cracked open. She pulled Jenny close, burying her face in the baby's soft curls and whispered, Okay, sweetheart. Okay. David watched them, his own eyes wet with tears, humbled by the grace he didn't deserve and the second chance he'd been given. Thank you, he said quietly, for not giving up on us. Ashanti looked up at him, then down at Jenny, who had settled contentedly against her shoulder, thumb in her mouth, safe and loved. She's my daughter now, Ashanti said softly, the words both a promise and a healing. And I will protect her with everything I have. David nodded, too emotional to speak. As they stood together in the garden, the golden afternoon light casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, Ashanti felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Something she'd thought she'd lost forever when they told her daughter hadn't survived. Hope, purpose, home. Jenny stirred in her arms, murmuring sleepily, Love you, Mama. Ashanti pressed a kiss to her forehead, tears streaming freely now. I love you too, sweetheart. In the golden light of the Oliver estate, surrounded by peace she'd fought so hard to protect, Ashanti realized she had finally come home. Not to a place, but to a purpose. Not to a Guam, but to a life worth living. Not to someone else's child, but to the daughter her heart had been waiting for all along. And for the first time since that devastating night 7 years ago, Ashanti allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this second chance at motherhood. Jenny was hers, and she was Jenny's, forever. If this story moved you, share the moment. Don't let it fade. Follow Motherland Stories and tap that like button to keep these voices alive. Every day we uncover strong stories, raw truths, and quiet acts of courage that shape our world. Join a circle of listeners, dreamers, and changemakers, because every story deserves to be heard. This wasn't just an episode, it was a call to remember. Silence hides injustice. Courage exposes it. At Motherland Stories, we don't turn away. We bear witness. Subscribe and stand with stories that challenge power and celebrate truth.